Tipping in Egypt. If you are traveling to Egypt, paying tips and gratuities is going to be a big aspect of your trip, like it or not. So in this video, let's talk about to whom you should pay tips and how much each person should be tipped in Egypt. Let's talk about your frequently asked questions about paying tips and gratuities, like if you should pay them in US dollars or local currency. And let's also talk about the philosophy behind tipping and why paying tipping in Egypt is so important. If I don't answer one of your questions in this video, please leave a comment and let me know so that I can add that question on to the next video that I do, and I can also update the blog post in the video description with your question about tipping. Now let's get started. If you don't know me already, my name is Gus, and I started Egypt Adventures Travel because I love Egypt and I want to help people have amazing trips there. I create custom itineraries, I lead group tours, I also arrange private tours. So you can go to my website, egyptadventurestravel.com, to learn more, and then we can chat about your Egypt adventure. Before jumping into things like how much you tip your tour guide, or if you tip every day of the Nile cruise or at the end of the Nile cruise, I want to talk a little bit about tipping in Egypt in general and the philosophy behind tipping and why it happens. For travelers visiting Egypt from places like Australia or certain countries in Europe where tipping isn't a thing at all, or it's not very common, or it's only done in really specific situations, it can be jarring to go to Egypt and to be expected to pay gratuities in all of these different situations to lots of different people. I've heard from a lot of my guests from the USA that the culture in Egypt feels pretty similar around tipping than it does to the US, but for people especially from places where tipping is not the norm, it can be really strange and uncomfortable. But in Egypt, tipping is a huge part of everybody's everyday life. I see Egyptian people all of the time giving small change to people who help them park their car, to the doorman at their apartment, to somebody who puts their groceries into the bags for them at the supermarket. Tipping is a really huge part of the culture in Egypt, and it's something that everyday people do. And in the tourism industry especially, tipping is a giant part of people's income. From people in the tourism industry, the income from tipping is usually the vast majority of the money that they take home on a monthly basis. Just like restaurant industries in the United States paying workers a low wage because they know that they're going to make the majority of their money from tips, in Egypt, people in the tourism industry make fairly low salaries compared to their peers who are working in other professional industries, and then they are expected to be making the majority of their income from tips from the guests. It's one of the reasons why you might think that certain tours or prices of working with tour guides or companies might be lower than what you'd expect, because a lot of that money is expected to be made up from tips. So, like the system, hate the system, that is what the system is. So tour guides, representatives, and everyone you work with in the tourism industry is going to be expecting a gratuity. It's going to be part of their income. That's not to say that you have to tip and it's going to be a requirement. Somebody's going to hold you at gunpoint until you pay them a tip. And it's not to say you need to tip for service that is unprofessional or a service that is not what was expected or what was promised. But tipping is a really, really big part of the culture in Egypt in general, and especially in the tourism industry. So that's why I made this video, so that I can take away all of the questions around tipping and make it from something that's confusing or uncomfortable or awkward to something that is easily done, is predictable, is consistent, and that you can show genuine gratitude when paying these gratuities to all the wonderful people who take care of you in Egypt. Now that we covered the philosophy behind tipping and why we pay gratuities in Egypt, especially for folks who are working in the tourism industry, let's jump in and let's talk about all of the different scenarios a traveler will run into in Egypt, whether or not it's expected or appropriate to tip, and how much a person should tip. In general, before I get into these recommendations, I always say amounts now in US dollars. The reason for this is because US dollars, what I've noticed recently, are the more preferred method of receiving tips for the majority of people in the tourism industry. The Egyptian pound has been fluctuating a lot in recent years and is consistently losing value, and so telling guests the amounts in US dollars helps make sure that folks know a consistent amount that a good tip would be for a local person working in the tourism industry. It also is something that you can check the local currency amount by and pay in local currency. Just because I say a tip is 10 US dollars doesn't mean that you need to have USD cash on you. You could pay in euros, you could pay in Great British pounds. You could also search Google, you could say 10 USD to EGP for Egyptian pounds. And Google will tell you what the exchange rate is and tell you how much exactly that amount is worth in Egyptian pounds based on the current exchange rate at the moment. So I'll give these amounts in US dollars. Most people prefer being paid in USD now for tips, but you can always convert that into Egyptian pounds. And I say US dollars just because it's a more consistent number with the economy in Egypt and what's been happening with their local currency recently. Let's start out with how much to tip your Egypt tour guide. When travelers go to Egypt, they'll often be led around by a local Egyptian Egyptologist. This is somebody who has an undergraduate degree or potentially even graduate education in Egyptology with an emphasis on leading tours in a specific language. This person's going to be taking you to all the historic sites, explaining all the timelines and history and names of the pharaohs, answering all your questions, and making sure you have a really great experience at all of your visits. The starting amount to tip an Egyptologist guide, I recommend 10 US dollars as a minimum. This would be for just basic service. Maybe the tour guide wasn't even, amazing, didn't really wow you, but you felt like they did what they were expected to do. They took you to the pyramids, they talked about the history, they answered questions. I recommend 15 US dollars per day as a pretty solid amount. And then when you get up into the amounts of like $20, $25 per day, that's for like a tour guide who really did a great job. You felt like they took great care of your group. And then $30 a day is like, wow, this person should be starting their own company and training tour guides on how to do it. They're just amazing. They really went above and beyond. They were fantastic. So 10 US dollars as a pretty minimum starting point for the group. 30 US dollars is like, whoa. And it's a spectrum. So you can decide based on that. And those are my recommendations, how much you should tip your local Egyptian tour guide. Those are the amounts per day. So let's say that the tour guide's with you for 3 full days of sightseeing in Cairo. You'd want to tip them between 30 US dollars to 90 US dollars, like absolute maximum total for the entire group. So if you have a group of 10 people, that's the amount of money that the entire group should be tipping. When you're tipping a tour guide, I recommend paying them in one lump amount. It's a much easier for them that way. So if you have a group of 7 people, instead of everybody trying to pay a little bit of cash here and there, just having everybody put their cash together makes it much, much easier. If a tour guide's with you for 2 days, it's a great idea to tip them at the very end of the amount of time that you're with them. On the first day, you could say, hey, we really appreciated your help today. We've got some extra money that we want to say thank you with. We're going to do that tomorrow at the end of our time with you. And then you can set up that expectation, get all of the cash together for the tip, put it in an envelope is a really nice way to do it, and then hand it publicly to the guide in front of the group at the end of your time with them. Say, thank you so much. This is just something extra as a thank you for taking great care of us in Cairo. And you could do the same thing if you have a tour guide for 2 or 3 days in Luxor or 2 days in Aswan, giving them the tip as a group at the end of your time with them. If you ever have any questions about if you should be tipping in USD or Egyptian pounds, or if a guide prefers being tipped at the beginning of the trip or the end of the trip, and beginning like, every single day as the day goes instead of at the very end of the trip, you can just ask your guide. You can say, hey, I really want to make sure I'm saying thank you for your service and giving you a gratuity. Do you prefer I do that at the end of the trip, at the end of my time with you, or would you like that, each day at the end of each day? And you can ask them and see what they prefer. Those are my recommendations for how much and how and when you should tip your Egypt tour guide. And I think I mentioned this before, but all of these amounts are going to be on my blog in a quick cheat sheet guide. So you can go to my blog post. It's linked in the video description, and it'll have a quick cheat sheet at the top with all of the different big categories for gratuities and how much I recommend. And then it'll also go more in depth later on. So if you haven't checked out that blog post, you can save it and then you can reference it throughout your time in Egypt. The next person you're probably going to be interacting with during your time in Egypt is your driver. This is a professionally licensed tourism driver. They actually have to take special tests and get special certification, and it's quite difficult. If you've seen the insane traffic in Cairo, you probably know why a tourism driver has to have really great licenses and qualifications and pass tests. These drivers are with you from the airport transfers to bringing you to the sites, bringing you to hotels, maybe bringing you to and from dinners. So for tipping your driver, I recommend tipping them at the end of each day or talking with your tour guide. Usually drivers won't speak English well, they might, but ask the tour guide, hey, is Ahmed going to be our driver for just today? I want to make sure I'm appreciating him and showing my appreciation. Or is he going to be with us during the 3 days in Cairo so that I can give him a gratuity at the end as a thank you? And your tour guide can let you know when the driver is going to be with you and when would be a great time to give them a gratuity. In general, just like with a tour guide, it's best to tip a driver at the end of the time with them if that is what is preferred instead of each day. But if they prefer each day, or maybe if one driver's with you one day and then they have a new driver the next day, that's better to tip them out at the end of each day. But in general, if you can do it as one lump sum and explain that that's what you're going to do, that's great. And if you can do it for the entire group, so if you're a group of 12 people, if everybody can pool their stuff together and give one tip to the driver, that makes things just a more streamlined and more easy. And just like with a tour guide, if you can gather up the cash that you're going to pay as a gratuity to the driver, put it in an envelope, give it publicly, say, this is a thank you for all of the work you did, keeping us safe on the roads in Luxor or driving all the way down to Abu Simbel at 4 a.m, and making it a public thank you for the service that the driver provided you during your time in Egypt. Starting tip for a driver, I'd say for an airport transfer, so if all the driver's doing is picking you up at your hotel and bringing you to the airport or vice versa, I would say absolute minimum of $2 or the equivalent in Egyptian pounds, but probably about $5 is a good amount for that. And then if the driver is with you for a day, I recommend a minimum of $5 as the tip for the entire group. Usually about $10 is a really generous amount. And you could even go up to $15 if you were like, oh my gosh, Mohammed was the best driver ever. He got us everywhere we needed to go. We felt really safe. He played some fun tunes, or he just really had a smile on his face the whole time. I'd say $15 for the day is a really good like kind of maximum amount for somebody who's doing a really amazing job. Meet and assist representatives are the next person I want to talk about how much to pay gratuities and when to pay gratuities. A meet and assist representative is somebody who meets you inside of an airport or at a hotel, and they're like a tour guide in that they speak English and they're there to help you have a great experience, but they're more focused on the logistical aspects of your trip. So meeting you after you get off your plane, helping you get your visa purchased, helping you through customs and immigration, getting your baggage, and getting out to your airport transfer. Riding in the airport transfer with you all the way to your hotel, making sure you get checked in. If there was an issue with your room, talking with the front desk and helping you get switched to another room. That's the kind of stuff that a representative will do. Sometimes a representative will even be with the group for an entire day, just as somebody to help out with extra logistical support, with confirming reservations at restaurants, making sure everybody in the group is accounted for when the bus gets ready to leave the pyramids. So they're kind of like a tour guide in that they speak English and they're very client-facing, but they're more focused on logistical aspects of a trip instead of actually answering questions or talking about history. For a meet and assist representative who's meeting you in the airport, sign with your name on it, helping you through customs and buying the visa, baggage, getting you onto an airport transfer, and then saying goodbye as you're driving away, I recommend a $5 tip, maybe $10 if you have a really large group or if you felt like they did just an amazing job. So that's for just meeting you at the airport. Oftentimes, though, these meet and assist representatives will jump into the car with you at the airport and they'll ride with you all the way out to your hotel. Maybe they'll be with you for an hour and a half out to the Marriott Mina House by the pyramids, and then they'll help you get checked in. They'll carry your luggage for you up to the concierge. They'll call you within 30 minutes to say, hey, is everything good with the room? Is everything like we thought it would be? And just checking in on you, making sure you're checked into your hotel. I recommend between $10 to $15 for these types of interactions for the entire group for the meet and assist representative as a gratuity. If the meet and assist representative is with you an entire day or for several days and they're going with you to all of the activities, $15 is a great tip amount for them. $20 would be like, oh my gosh, you are amazing. You are like a logistics angel and you helped us with all these issues and you need to start your own company and teach people how to do what you do because you're fantastic. So that's what I recommend for tipping a meet and assist representative. In general, it's best to have cash on hand for these representatives to tip them in the moment. So if you're in the airport, they might have to duck out and rush off and help another client. So it's great to have $5 handy that you can just hand to them, or the equivalent in local currency if they need to rush off and go help somebody else and they're not with you in the airport transfer. So this is an instance where, unlike a tour guide where you might want to tip them at the end of 3 days and give them one large amount in an envelope for the whole group, a meet and assist representative, you want to have cash on hand and you'll probably want to tip them more so in the moment. But you can always ask them as well. You can say, hey, you're with me in the airport right now. Are you going to be bringing me to the Hilton Hotel and helping me get checked in? Just to kind of gauge and see when they're going to be with you and when a good time to pay that gratuity might be. Tipping in restaurants in Egypt is similar to the United States, but it's also kind of different. And it's pretty different from a lot of other places in the world, especially places where there's no tipping at restaurants. So let's talk about how much to tip at a restaurant. If you're going to a more informal street food kind of place, let's say you're getting a couple of falafel sandwiches and the total is 9 Egyptian pounds, it's a great idea to round it up to 10 Egyptian pounds, hand them a 10 Egyptian pound bill, say keep the change. So at smaller, more street foody, informal places, no tip at all is expected. Maybe just rounding up the bill is a nice gesture. Same goes for just like very, very small kind of hole-in-the-wall restaurants. For a nicer sit-down restaurant, they'll often print out a receipt or handwrite a receipt that's itemized, and they'll include a service charge on the bill most of the time. For this service charge, it's usually between 10 to 16%. I personally, even if there is a service charge on the bill, I like to either add a little additional if I'm paying via credit card. So if your bill is, let's say, 300 Egyptian pounds, you could say, hey, I'd like to pay 330 Egyptian pounds. They'll punch that number into the machine and then you'll pay that with your credit card. Or leaving a little bit of cash on the table, or maybe rounding the bill up, or leaving extra cash and asking for change in addition to that service charge. Just because I don't know where that service charge goes to. I would love to think that it goes to the serving staff and to all the people at the restaurant, but I like just giving a little bit of extra so that I know that it's going to the serving staff themselves, like leaving some cash on the table at a nicer restaurant. For that, I'll usually do between 5 to 10%. If there's no service charge added onto a bill, I'll usually add between 10 to 20% if I'm at like a nicer sit-down restaurant. Now, tipping in restaurants for local Egyptians is not as common of a thing as it is in the USA, where 15 to 20% is pretty much expected. So this is something where you run into differences in different places. In restaurants like the Nine Pyramids Lounge in Giza, where there's a lot of tourists going, it's more expected and it's really appreciated to leave gratuities. Versus that some other restaurants, maybe in more far-flung places, like if you're eating at a fish place in Port Said, it might not be a place where local people are tipping 20%, but it's probably a place where they're leaving something additional for the serving staff or for the wait staff. Let's talk about tipping on a Nile cruise. There are two main types of Nile cruises that travelers might take in Egypt. A large Nile cruise ship, so that's like the big giant boats that can fit over 100 people, and then the smaller boats like the Dahabeeyah yachts that might only have 6 cabins, 8 cabins. They might only fit maximum 14, 20, 12 people. For the larger Nile cruise ships, it depends and varies ship by ship, but often they will have one envelope or one central space, like a box or something that gets passed around, where gratuities can be paid at the end of the Nile cruise. Generally speaking, gratuities for a larger Nile cruise ship are for the entire staff, all inclusive, although some ships might do things a little differently. So you can ask your tour guide or ask the ship manager what the system is. For a large Nile cruise ship, a tip of around $10 per person per day. So if you're on a 3-night Nile cruise that goes from Aswan up to Luxor, a tip of about $30 per person would be a nice amount to leave as the whole tipping amount for the entirety of the cruise. For a smaller Dahabeeyah yacht, I recommend tipping around $20 per person per day. So let's say you booked a 5-night Dahabeeyah boat ride from Luxor down to Aswan. I would recommend tipping about $100 per person. So I guess instead of per person per day, I should say per person per night, because it's a 5-night Dahabeeyah cruise, which technically is you're disembarking on the 6th day. In general, Dahabeeyah yachts will have the tips be paid at the very end. Often they'll have this kind of pomp and circumstance farewell party and have a cake and all the staff come out and say thank you. And then there'll often be an envelope or maybe an envelope for each cabin that you can put cash into as a tip for the entirety of the staff. So just like a larger Nile cruise ship, the smaller Dahabeeyah yachts, the tips are usually paid for everybody all together, but you have to check with the boat manager or ask your tour guide because different Dahabeeyah boats might do things a little bit differently. For other types of boats, like let's say that you book a boat for a day, you have a felucca that's going to take you around Aswan for an entire day. I recommend tipping the boat just like you would tip a private driver. So the same types of amounts that I recommended would apply. If it's a really short boat ride, a tip of maybe $2 to $3 in the local currency equivalent is a great idea. In hotels in Egypt, there's a few different instances when it's a good idea to tip, although it's less expected than it is for tipping on a Nile cruise or a tour guide or a driver. So for hotels, if you're staying at, let's say, the Marriott Hotel in Cairo, I would recommend leaving around $1 equivalent in local currency per day on your pillow for the cleaning staff. And if you're staying for 4 nights, you could just leave a $5 bill, for example, at the end of it, or maybe on the 2nd or 3rd day. It doesn't have to be every single day leaving something. But in general, that's a really nice and generous thing to do for the hotel cleaning staff. Same goes for porterage. If there's somebody who's taking your bags and they're delivering them up to your room door, it's generally nice to give around $1 to $2 or its equivalent per person. So if there's 2 people in the room, a porter comes up with your suitcases and was lugging them through the hallways and the lobby and up the elevator, it's a nice gesture to give that person around $2 cash equivalent in local currency, because that person can then take that and use it right away. Giving them US dollars in singles, I'm going to talk more about this later on, makes it really challenging because they have to find somebody to exchange it with. They can't take it to exchange offices. So more on that later on. But for a porter, about $1 to $2 is a great tip for them to bring up your bags. Otherwise, at hotels, the only other time I see tips coming into play are for the breakfast buffets. Every once in a while, I'll notice a hotel like the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Cairo will put like an extra line for room number and for gratuity, and they'll want you to sign that. That is not expected to have a gratuity left on it. It's almost like they might be trying to ask for it as something additional for people to do. I'm not exactly sure. It might just be for like record-keeping purposes to keep track of how many guests had the breakfast buffet and what their room number is and have their signature. But for that, I always advise my guests to just leave it blank, put your room number down, and sign the receipt if they happen to do that at all. Most hotels don't have you do that for the breakfast buffet, but that's the only other instance at a hotel where I've seen somebody talking about or asking me about gratuities. Another instance that you might notice somebody asking for a tip in Egypt, or you might think, do I need to tip this person, is if you go into the bathroom and there's somebody in the bathroom who's handing out paper towels, who's squeezing soap literally into your hands for you, or who's cleaning up the bathroom while you're using the facilities. Or they might be waiting outside the bathroom. In the case of somebody's waiting outside the bathroom, like at the Giza Pyramids or at Abu Simbel, this is not a gratuity, but this is a bathroom charge. Just like at a lot of places in Europe, for example, you might need to pay €1 to use a restroom. So you pay that bathroom attendant, it's usually around 20 Egyptian pounds. If you don't have small bills, you can ask them for change. You can give them a 100 Egyptian pound bill and you can say one person, and you can just wait expectantly for them to hand you the change. They should have it because they probably have tons of change from other people using the bathroom, but that's more like an entrance fee for the bathroom. And some of them, they even allow credit card payments. So at the Giza Plateau, I've been noticing recently, if you need to pay the 20 Egyptian pounds or whatever it is to go into the bathroom as the entrance fee, they'll now even accept Visa or MasterCard for that. So the people waiting out front, it's more like an admission. The people who are inside of the bathroom attendants who are cleaning or giving paper towels, that I say just kind of feel out the vibe. Some places actually actively say do not tip the bathroom staff, like at the Egyptian Museum, the old museum in downtown Cairo, they say do not tip bathroom staff. Same thing for the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. Sometimes at a restaurant, there might be somebody who's giving paper towels or helping people with soap or cleaning. There might be like a basket that has some cash in it on the sink countertop. It's kind of an invitation. These bathroom attendants who are inside of a bathroom, it's not expected to pay them. The only time it's expected is if somebody's outside of the bathroom and if it's like an admission to enter the bathroom, like at Philae Temple or at the Giza Pyramids, for example. A lot of travelers, especially independent, more DIY travelers, are going to take different types of transportation, like maybe public transit or an Uber instead of having a private driver. I recommend tipping Uber drivers, rounding up the fare, maybe giving them 5 Egyptian pounds, something small. You can do that on the credit card, although cash is preferred for a lot of Uber drivers because they like having the money right away that they can then use to fill up their car with more gas or to pay for food that evening or to go out to eat. So tipping Uber drivers, maybe 5 or 10 Egyptian pounds, rounding up the bill. It's a nice gesture. It's not necessary and it's not expected. Same thing goes for taxis. Rounding up the bill, if the taxi fare comes out to be 48 Egyptian pounds, giving them 50 and not asking for the change is a nice gesture. However, it's not expected. Don't tip any public transit workers. So if you're taking a microbus, if you're taking the metro, you're not expected, nor should you be paying tips to any of the people in public transit. And I've never even been asked to do this at all. So I don't think it'd be something that anybody would see, but it's not expected and don't do it. If you take a long distance bus, like let's say you take GoBus from Cairo all the way to Luxor, you also are not expected to tip the bus driver. The only instance you might be expected to tip is if you take a sleeper train, for example, between Cairo and Luxor. You're on the train for 8 hours and there's one porter serving you meals and showing you how to use the facilities in the cabin and answering your questions. Then it would be generous to give that person maybe $2 equivalent at the end of the train journey. But otherwise, all other public transit workers or anything long distance bus or train, no tips are expected and it would be kind of weirdly received if it were to be given. Oftentimes when you're doing things like going down into the tombs of the Valley of the Kings or going into the Unas pyramid at Saqqara, there will be men who are keeping an eye on the place, making sure people aren't scratching their names into the hieroglyphs, making sure people aren't climbing on top of statues. So these people are going to be hanging around and they might say, hey, come over here, or look, Horus, and shine a flashlight on something. As soon as you start interacting with one of these people, it's usually expected to leave them something. Maybe 50 Egyptian pounds, maybe 20 Egyptian pounds, definitely no more than that. I generally, if somebody comes up to me at a temple and is like, come here, I generally just put my right hand over my heart, smile, and shake my head no, and then just continue walking. Or I might just say shukran, which means thank you in Arabic, and just keep walking so that I don't have to worry about giving that person gratuities. In some of the spots though, like in the Unas pyramid in Saqqara, for example, it's impossible to avoid getting talked to and getting led around by one of these people. So having a small amount, maybe 50 Egyptian pounds, 20 Egyptian pounds that I can just keep in my hand and shake the person's hand at the end and say shukran and pass them off the cash and just keep walking and be on my merry way is the way to go. In some tombs though, or some places, it's not allowed to take pictures or videos. So sometimes a guard or somebody who's keeping an eye on the place and they're supposed to be saying, you know, no photo, no video. The Jewish synagogue in Coptic Cairo is where I see this happening quite often. Technically no photos or videos are allowed, but I'll see people taking photos or videos, but then they're expected to give the person who let them take the pictures or videos usually around 100 Egyptian pounds or something like that. If something like this does happen and you're confused or you don't know what to do, you can definitely talk to your tour guide and ask them what you should do. But generally giving them about 100 Egyptian pounds, that's about $3 at the current, actually no, that's about $2 with the exchange rate. Currency keeps fluctuating and it's hard to even remember what the exchange rate is with the USD and the Egyptian pound. Giving about 100 Egyptian pounds is a fine amount if something like that does happen. You are going to see a lot of armed military and police officers at different sites in Egypt, and one of them might even come with you on a tour and join your bus for the day or join your car for the day and visit the pyramids with you and make sure you get back to your hotel safely. In general, I like to let my local Egyptian tour guide handle any potential gratuities for those people. It makes me feel really strange to be giving gratuity to a police or to like a military person. So I usually let the tour guide handle that, and I ask them, hey, how much should this cost? And they tell me and I give it to them. Oftentimes, we usually tip those people around $1 equivalent, maybe $2 equivalent maximum. So that could be something that you might run into on your trip. It's not as common though as obviously having a tour guide or a driver with you every single day. If you book a spa treatment while you're in Egypt at one of the hotels, like you're staying at the Fairmont, which has a really nice spa, and you book a massage, it's a nice gesture to tip between 10 to 20% in cash directly to the person providing the service. That is really similar to what it's like in the United States and in a lot of other places. So now I talked about the philosophy and why tipping is an important part of traveling to Egypt. I gave you recommendations for how much and to whom to tip for tons of different situations. So now I want to jump into all the frequently asked questions that I have been given over the last several years about paying gratuities in Egypt. If you're watching this video and if I don't answer your question or if you don't hear your question in this video, please drop a comment and leave me your question or go over the blog post and write a comment on there so that I can add that question to my blog post, and when I do update this video the next time that I need to about gratuities and tipping in Egypt, I can add in those extra FAQs as well. So the first question is a really common one I'm asked all the time. Do people in Egypt prefer being tipped in US dollars or some other foreign currency or local currency, Egyptian pounds? My old video, I used to recommend tipping in local currency because back when, that was something that was preferred by people. They could easily use the money right away. It was easy to just bring it to a store and buy something. They didn't have to go to a foreign exchange office and transfer it over to local currency. But nowadays, majority of people I talk to actually prefer being paid their gratuities in foreign currency. US dollars, euros, or British pounds are usually the preferred foreign currencies, with US dollars being the one that's the most preferred most of the time. Now this varies, so you should definitely ask your tour guide or ask whoever you're going to be giving a tip if it's a larger tip, like for a Nile cruise or for paying your tour guide for 4 days. Like you wouldn't ask your meet and assist representative this for just a, helping you through the airport. But you can always ask, do you prefer being tipped in US dollars or in Egyptian pounds? Because I have both currencies and I just want to give you the one that's best for you. Most people are probably going to say foreign currency. The reason for this is because Egypt's currency's value has been fluctuating a ton. When I first went to Egypt back in 2012, $1 would get you 6 Egyptian pounds. Now, $1 gets you almost 50 Egyptian pounds. So local people actually like stockpiling hard currency in foreign currency because then it's almost like that currency will keep its value even if the local currency, the Egyptian pound, drops in value. So that's a big reason why you'll see US dollars being preferred for tips. But this brings me to another question where people say, can I tip people using $1 bills? Maybe they go to Mexico and they get a bunch of $1 bills and they just give it to all the resort workers for a drink and for bags and for whatever. In Egypt, don't do this. Do it if you absolutely have no other currency that you can use to tip somebody. Obviously, tipping somebody a $1 bill is going to be better received than not tipping somebody at all. But the problem with tipping people in Egypt with $1 bills, that people usually don't know this, Local people cannot do anything with that $1 bill except ask a foreign person to give them Egyptian pounds for it on an off-the-market currency exchange type transaction. Banks in Egypt, currency exchange offices, and no one will want $1 bills or coins. They don't accept them, they don't work with them, they won't trade you or exchange you or do anything with them. So you might actually notice, especially in Luxor or in other really tourist-heavy cities, people coming up to you with a stack of $1 bills, and they might say, hey, change, change, change. They're not asking you for money. They're asking you to take the 10 $1 bills and then to give them 10 US dollars worth in Egyptian currency, and then you take the $1 bills back to the US where you can actually use them. So you might notice this, and that's just a symptom of what happens when people tip people in $1 bills. They then kind of put the onus on this person to try to find some random tourist who's willing to exchange local currency for the $1 bills they have, because they can't take them to the bank, they can't take them to an exchange office, and they can't spend them anywhere. Now, of course, people always talk about getting smaller bill amounts in Egypt because $1 US is worth about 50 Egyptian pounds. And if you want to tip somebody about $1 US, but you can't give them US dollars, you should give them Egyptian pounds. How do you get the lower denominations of bills? Because usually an ATM or an exchange office will just give people 200s or 100s, and it's hard for people to get change. So to this I say, go to a kushk or a kiosk where they're selling water or snacks, buy a snack, give them a 200 Egyptian pound bill, try to get some change, and then hold on to that change for one of these instances where you need to tip. Or ask your tour guide if they have change, ask other travelers if they have change. Or if you want to tip somebody, you can give them a 100 Egyptian pound bill and you can say, hey, do you have change? Can I have 250s? And then you could give them the 150 and keep the second one for the next time where you might need a smaller denomination bill to give somebody a tip. So there are different ways that you can get smaller bills and you can get change. Buy some gum at a kiosk, go to a street food vendor and get something. So there's different ways you can get change, and that's much preferred than paying $1 bills to people where they can't use them. But of course, if you want to bring a stack of $1 bills to Egypt and then use those to tip people, that's totally fine and that's your prerogative. Just know that that is much more difficult for those people to actually use that currency without doing this extra step of finding somebody to exchange it with. Another question I get asked is, what types of bills should I be paying tips with? Because I keep hearing about getting new and fresh bills and not bringing old bills or stained bills or torn bills to Egypt. And the answer to this question is, it's really, really important to have brand new bills that don't have any folds, tears, markings, any writing, any stamps, or any stains on them. Because when you're giving these as tips to people, and this is talking about foreign currency, so not Egyptian pounds, when you're giving these foreign currency bills to local people, if they have these markings or these defects on them, the banks and exchange offices in Egypt are really, really strict about the bills that they accept. So it is actually really important. People are asking, why does it matter what kind of bills I bring? It's really important to bring nice, crisp, new bills. So maybe going to the bank before your trip to Egypt, thinking about how much money you should have on hand for tips for different people. You can even get envelopes and have an envelope be tour guide, an envelope be driver, and you can pre-plan out gratuities. You can go to the bank and say, hey, I'm gonna need 3 $20 bills that are fresh and crisp. And then you can get those, stick them in the envelope for the person, and then work on the other tips that you're gonna need for the trip. So that's a really common question. Why do I need to care about what types of bills, or do I need new bills to bring to Egypt for tips? And it's not an absolute yes, but it's doing the person you're giving that money to a huge favor, because then they're not going to have all the hassle of bringing it to an exchange office or a bank and having that denied. Another really common question I get asked is, what is the black market? This question is not quite relating to tipping exactly, just more currency as a whole. But in Egypt, they have official currency exchange offices that are government licensed, where you go to a physical location, you give them foreign currency, they take a copy of your passport, they sell you Egyptian pounds at the government set rate. The exchange rate is government set. So it's not like going to a country and this exchange place will give you this much and this one gives you that much and they charge really big commission and they don't. Every government exchange office, they're all government regulated. They all charge the same rates. So when you go to those offices, you're doing a currency exchange. The black market is when you go to a person and you just say, hey, I want to sell you $100 US. Say, hey, I'm going to give you this much in Egyptian pounds. And they don't take a copy of your passport. You're not at a brick and mortar storefront, and there's no record of this transaction. So that's what the black market is. It's not like a seedy place where people are selling their kidneys. It just means a currency exchange that's done outside of the official exchange offices. These are technically illegal, so I don't recommend tourists doing them at all. However, it is a common thing that tourists will do in Egypt because there are people all over who are often willing to exchange Egyptian pounds for foreign currency. I caution people, though, not to do this since it is technically against the law. I've never heard of anyone getting in trouble, but I've heard of local people having issues with the police when doing this. And recently in Egypt, they've been really watching who has foreign currency and cracking down if they catch somebody with large amounts of foreign currency that they believe that they're using to exchange for Egyptian pounds or vice versa. So the black market is when you're exchanging currency outside of an official exchange. You might get better rates, you might get really better rates, but it's technically against the law. I know this video is really long, but I wanted to give a lot of really specific examples about whom and how much to pay for tips and gratuities in Egypt. I wanted to talk about my philosophy behind tipping in Egypt and why it's important and part of travel to Egypt. And I also wanted to answer some of the frequently asked questions that I am given about tipping. So if you have any other questions or any other thoughts that I didn't cover in this video, please leave a comment and let me know. I love hearing from my viewers and then being able to use those questions and those comments, answering them in the comment section, but using them to help me with my next video or my next blog post. And remember, you can use the blog post that's linked in the video description below. You can save it and you can reference it. It has that cheat sheet on it to help you have a quick reference when you're traveling throughout Egypt. I'm so glad I get to talk to you about Egypt. I love talking about travel to Egypt, and I'm ready to talk about it anytime. Thanks for watching, everybody. Until the next video.